journey, MrBeast's real journey, how he built a multi-million-dollar empire. Here's something that's going to mess with your head a little. The biggest YouTuber on the planet, a guy whose company is valued at around $5 billion, recently had to borrow money from his mom to help pay for his wedding. Not because he's broke, not because his business is failing, but because on paper he's worth billions. And in his actual bank account, he keeps less than $1 million in cash for himself. Let that sink in for a second. A man with a $5 billion company has less spending money than plenty of regular 9-to-5 workers who've been saving consistently for 10 years. If that sounds completely backwards to you, that's exactly the point. Because the way MrBeast built his empire breaks almost every assumption people have about money, wealth, and what it actually means to be rich. And once you understand it, you're going to start seeing money in a completely different way. So let's get into it. Here's the mistake almost everyone makes about money. They think the goal is to make money and then keep it. Earn it, save it, stack it up, watch the number grow. That feels safe. That feels smart. That feels like winning. And look, for most people, that advice isn't entirely wrong. Having savings matters. Having a financial cushion matters. But here's the thing nobody talks about. There's a difference between saving money to feel secure and saving money because you're scared to use it. Most people fall into that second category without even realizing it. Think about this. You get a bonus at work. Maybe it's $2,000. What does most people's brain immediately start doing? Planning how to spend it. A vacation, a new phone, a nice dinner, something to celebrate the win. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a completely human response. But here's the question almost nobody asks in that moment. What if that same $2,000 could be turned into something that makes more money on its own? That's the idea of reinvestment, and it's the secret hiding inside MrBeast's entire story. Let's go back to the beginning. Before he was MrBeast, he was just Jimmy, a teenager sitting in his bedroom in North Carolina, uploading YouTube videos that almost nobody watched. Not for a few weeks, not for a couple of months, for years. While other kids his age were spending money on clothes and games and going out on weekends, Jimmy was grinding away on videos that were getting almost zero traction. The part most people skip over when they tell this story. He wasn't some overnight success. He uploaded video after video that completely flopped. Most creators would have quit. Most people, when they put in that much effort and get almost nothing back, start telling themselves a story. One isn't working. I'm wasting my time. I should stop. That's a completely normal psychological response. Our brains are wired to cut off effort when results don't show up fast enough. But Jimmy didn't do that. Instead of treating each failed video as proof that it wasn't working, he treated each one as information, a test, a data point about what worked and what didn't. And this is actually one of the most important money psychology lessons you'll ever hear, even though it has nothing to do with YouTube specifically. Most people treat money decisions like a grade. Pass or fail, win or lose. You try something, it doesn't work immediately, and your brain screams, "You made a mistake, get out now." But people who actually build real wealth tend to treat decisions more like experiments. Try something, see what happens, adjust, try again. The key isn't the size of the bet, it's the mindset of testing and adjusting instead of expecting. Instant results and panicking when they don't arrive. Okay, so eventually some of Jimmy's videos started getting traction. And this is where most people, and honestly, most creators, make a critical decision that determines everything that comes after. Picture this moment. You finally get a win. Maybe it's your first real paycheck from a side hustle. Maybe it's your first month where an investment actually grew. Maybe it's a bonus you weren't expecting. What's the instinctive feeling in that moment? It's the urge to enjoy it. To treat yourself. You earned it. You worked for it. Now you deserve to spend some of it on something nice. And again, that feeling isn't irrational. It's deeply human. Psychologists call it a reward response. Your brain releases a little hit of satisfaction when effort finally pays off, and spending some of that reward feels like close the loop. Work hard, get paid, enjoy it. Done. But this is exactly the moment where the path toward building something real splits away from the path of staying comfortable forever. When Jimmy's videos started making a little bit of money, and we're talking small numbers at first, not anything close to what you might imagine, he didn't pocket it and go buy something fun. He put it back into the videos. Better equipment, better editing, bigger ideas, more ambitious stunts. Now, most people hear that and think, okay, that sounds like a sacrifice, like he was just being cheap and denying himself things he wanted. But that's the wrong way to think about it. It wasn't about denying himself spending. It was about redirecting the spending towards something that could multiply. Here's a simple way to picture what was actually happening. Imagine you have a single apple seed. You're hungry, sure, but eating one apple seed isn't going to do much for you. There's basically nothing there. But if you plant that seed, in a few years, it becomes a tree that produces hundreds of apples every single year for decades. Early money, especially small amounts of early money, behaves more like seeds than apples. It doesn't look like much on its own, but where you decide to put it determines whether it stays a seed forever or grows into something keeps producing long after you've stopped actively working on it. When Jimmy reinvested those early YouTube earnings back into better videos, he wasn't just saving, he was planting. And each video that got reinvestment had a chance to perform better than the last, which meant more views, more revenue, more to reinvest again. It compounds, not just financially, but in terms of audience, momentum, and attention. X new now, here's where the story gets really interesting, because this next part surprises almost everyone. Fast forward a few years. MrBeast has become one of the biggest creators on YouTube. Hundreds of millions of subscribers. Billions of views every month. You'd think at this point he'd finally relax. Bank the money. Buy the mansion, the cars, live the YouTube lifestyle people imagine when they picture rich creator. He's already won, right? Time to enjoy it. But that's not what happened. If anything, the stakes got bigger. His company started making hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue. And despite bringing in close to $500 million in a single year, his personal available cash reportedly stayed under $1 million. He was reinvesting so aggressively that he had to borrow money from his own mom for his wedding. For most people, that sounds completely insane. If you made that kind of money, wouldn't you just keep some of it? Pay for your own wedding out of pocket change? But here's the deeper truth hiding underneath this story. The vast majority of what comes into his business goes right back out, into bigger videos, better production, new business ventures, more opportunities. And understanding why that's actually a rational choice requires understanding something that most people never really learn about money. There's a massive difference between income and wealth, and there's an even bigger difference between wealth on paper and cash in your hand. Here's a simple way to understand it. Imagine someone owns a house. The house is worth $400,000. Are they rich by $400,000? Well, sort of, but they can't spend the house at the grocery store. They can't hand a chunk of their living room to a waiter as a tip. The value is real, but it's locked inside an asset. MrBeast's company, being valued at around $5 billion, works the exact same way, just at an enormous scale. He owns more than half of Beast Industries. On paper, that makes him worth several $billion. But that $5 billion isn't sitting in a vault somewhere collecting dust. It's spread across video production budgets, a chocolate brand called Feastables, food products, software tools, equipment, hundreds of employees, and future projects. It's all working, all tied up in things that are supposed to grow into more value over time. MrBeast's entire business model is basically a constant war against present bias, scaled up to a level most of us can barely imagine. Every time there's an opportunity to take profit, enjoy the win, and relax, the decision gets made to push it all back into the system instead. Now here's the question we're sitting with. If MrBeast keeps less than $1 million in personal cash, and most of his wealth is locked inside a company that's still losing money in some divisions, is he actually rich? The honest answer is, it depends entirely on what you mean by rich. If rich means having a giant pile of spendable cash sitting around that you can do whatever you want with, then no, not really. Not in the way most people imagine. But if rich means owning a controlling stake in assets and systems that are growing in value, reaching hundreds of millions of people, generating massive revenue, and have the potential to produce enormous returns over time, then yes. extraordinarily rich. This is the gap between looking rich and being wealthy, and it's one of the most misunderstood ideas in all of personal finance. Here's a comparison that might make it click. Imagine two people. Person A has $50,000 sitting in a regular savings account. It's not doing much, barely keeping up with inflation, but it's there. It's safe, and it feels good to look at. Person B has $10,000 in cash, but they also own a small rental property worth $200,000. That property is slowly increasing in value, and it brings in rent every single month. On the surface, Person A might feel richer. More cash, more liquidity, more money they can touch and spend right now. But Person B has more total wealth, and more importantly, they have an asset that keeps producing value over time, without them having to actively do anything extra to maintain it. MrBeast, scaled up to an extreme degree, is Person B. Almost all of his value is locked into assets rather than sitting in cash. And by traditional financial standards, what he's doing is considered aggressive and unusual. But it's also exactly the kind of approach that has historically been behind some of the biggest business success stories ever built. So let's bring this down to you, because you're probably not running a $5 billion company, and that's completely fine. The lesson here isn't go lose $80 million on purpose. The lesson is about the underlying pattern, and that pattern scales down perfectly to normal life. Say you're in your 20s, working a regular job, and you manage to save a few extra $100 one month. There are basically three paths in front of you. Path 1, spend it on something that disappears quickly. A night out, new shoes, something fun but temporary. Nothing morally wrong with this. But that money is gone, and it produces nothing else. Path 2, save it in a regular bank account. It sits there, technically safe, but barely growing. Often not even keeping up with how prices rise over time. Path 3, put it towards something with the potential to grow. Investing it, putting it toward a skill that increases your earning potential. Putting it into a small project or side business that could eventually produce more income than the original amount. MrBeast's whole journey is Path 3, repeated over and over at an enormous scale for years without breaking the pattern, even after the wins became almost unimaginably large. Most people, when they get their first big win, switch back to Path 1 or 2. They finally deserve to enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's worth understanding that this is the exact moment where the path splits between staying in the same financial position and building something that actually compounds. Here's the practical takeaway, and it's simpler than most people expect. You don't need millions of dollars for this lesson to apply to your life. You just need to start noticing the moments where you have a choice between consuming a financial win and reinvesting it. And then, at least some of the time, choosing the second option, even when the amount is small. When you get a raise, instead of immediately upgrading your lifestyle to match it, direct a portion of that increase toward investments or skills. When you finish paying off a debt, instead of filling that freed up cash with new spending, redirect even half of it towards something that grows. When a side project starts making a little bit of money, instead of treating it as extra spending cash, consider putting some of it back in to make that project better. None of this means never enjoying your money. MrBeast still lives his life. He just structures things so that growth comes first, and personal spending becomes almost secondary, even at a scale most people will never reach. You don't have to go to that extreme, but shifting even 10 or 20% of your wins toward growth instead of consumption consistently over years, that's what separates people whose financial life looks identical in 10 years from people whose financial life looks completely transformed. There's one final piece of psychology worth understanding before we wrap up. Most people imagine patience as waiting, sitting still, doing nothing while you hold your breath and hope for a result. But the patience behind something like MrBeast's journey isn't passive at all. It's active patience. Continuing to put in effort and reinvest resources year after year without needing immediate proof that it's working. Continuing to take action and keep putting resources on the line long after most people would have stopped and cashed out. That's psychologically much harder than simply waiting, because passive waiting at least gives you the comfort of not risking anything further. Active patience means continuing to act, continuing to commit, long after the easy wins have arrived and the temptation to stop and enjoy it has become almost overwhelming. So here's the real takeaway from the story of MrBeast. His empire wasn't built by getting rich and then deciding to keep all the money. It was built by treating almost every win as raw material for the next bigger thing. Over and over for years, even after the numbers became almost unbelievably large. The lesson isn't really about YouTube. It's not about chocolate bars or game shows with $100 million budgets. It's about one simple question you can start asking yourself with your own money, no matter how small the amount. When this pays off, even a little, am I going to consume it or am I going to plant it? Most people's financial lives stay exactly the same for years because they keep choosing to consume every win the moment it arrives. But the people whose financial lives transform completely, they tend to be the ones who, again and again, quietly choose to plant instead. Wealth isn't built in the big dramatic moments people imagine. It's built in the small, repeated, almost boring decisions, made consistently, long after anyone else is paying attention. So the next time you're holding a little bit of extra money in your hand, just ask yourself that one question: consume it or plant it? Because somewhere out there, that exact decision, made small and made often, is the beginning of every empire that ever got built.